When I arrived in Paris, I just graduated Cornell University. At Cornell, I was making these fairly large paintings and was thinking that, it'd be really difficult to ship them from Paris back to New York. So I was thinking, what else can I do in Paris to really learn something that I didn't know before? So I ended up going to the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts, which was wonderful, and I enrolled in the Atelier Clarin, which is an atelier for lithography. Now, the difference between French teaching and American teaching is quite stark. Monsieur Clarin came once a week, and from what I understand was paid a fair amount of money to critique the work. And he was also very conservative and didn't know really what was going on in the contemporary art world. Anyway, when he approached me, and at that moment in time, when I was doing these lithographs, I was using photography, sort of these little cliches in my pictures. And he came over to me and said that this is the definition of the word art. And he went through space, light, this, that, and then he said to me, "Did you hear the word photography?" And I thought he was kidding, but he wasn't. And he said, if you persist in using photographic images in your pictures, which also have drawings and other kinds of techniques, he said, you must leave my atelier, which really kind of freaked me out because I really wanted to study there. Needless to say, he wasn't there much anyway, and it was the massier, this Japanese fellow who ran the shop, who taught me everything I needed to know. And so eventually I did leave the atelier, but that's a whole other story. When I came back to the US, that knowledge of lithography got me a job at Pratt Institute, where I was teaching. And while I was there, that led to writing a book called The Technique of Fine Art Lithography, which became sort of a textbook around the world. And then that was followed by another book on lithography. And I started getting invited all over the place to do lectures about it. Meanwhile, at the same time, my painting career was taking off, and I was having exhibitions in New York. And eventually, that led to a whole slew of museums buying my work, meaning the Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Philadelphia Museum, the National Gallery in Washington, and many others. And that also allowed me to get a job as a full professor at the State University of New York at Purchase. And I was invited to lecture literally around the world, in Australia, in Israel, in Holland, in England, in Scotland. The list is long. But I have to go back to the Pratt situation, because while I was there, two of my students were French, and this young, beautiful woman arrived, was very attracted to her, and eventually she was assigned to me as a monitor in my class, and I couldn't resist and asked her out on a date, and then a second date, and she has been with me for 50 years as my wife, and so I'm very grateful to the Fondation for giving me not only a career to a certain extent, but also my wife. Well, my memories of the Fondation are wonderful. I spent a lot of time there in my studio painting and just, writing and running around Paris a lot. But most of all, I spent my time in the bar. The bar at the Fondation was the place where, unfortunately, it was almost exclusively English-speaking students, but not always. There were a lot of French-speaking students as well. I also thought that I would never have a chance to really see Europe after this. This was my only chance. So I'd saved my money and bought myself a very small little car. It wasn't that small, it could fit 5 uncomfortably. And we used that car, I say we, because a bunch of us would travel constantly across Europe. We probably traveled 25,000 miles. Almost every weekend we went somewhere. It was just endless what one could do there. So I had a blast that year. I didn't make that many acquaintances that I've stayed in touch with, but I have stayed in touch with one, John Weber, and he's a magnificent woodcut artist and painter and mural painter. And he lives in Chicago. Unfortunately, I don't live very close to Chicago, so on rare occasions we get together, perhaps once a year or so. But I did meet a lot of characters. I won't name them because I'm not sure I can remember most of their names. Some of them were doing scientific research, like this fellow Jerry, who became a professor at Johns Hopkins and basically changed the history of science by doing his research out of, emanating from the Fondation.